Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Fan Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Uh-huh. So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
If you're a fan of comic books and comic book conventions, Daytona Beach Comic Con needs to be on your list of must attend events. It's a show that actually focuses on comic books. Imagine that! This year's event is happening on Saturday, September the 6th, and Sunday, September the 7th. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. There's a new convention in town, and it's sure to be mega fun without the mega expense. Comics, toys, collectibles, pop culture. ShadowCon, Saturday, February 1st, 2025, in Orlando, Florida. Silverline creators will be there, so we'll see you at the show. If you find yourself in the Orlando area, and let's be honest, doesn't everyone come to Orlando for the House of Mouse? Head over to Coliseum of Comics to get your comic book fix. Be sure to check out their location on East Colonial Drive, where they carry a wide selection of independent comics, including Silverline books. Stop by and don't forget to tell them Silverline sent you. Hey, if you're an independent comic creator looking to get your comic printed, look no further than Kablam Digital Printing. They print our comics and do a fantastic job. They can even print special edition covers. When you reach out to them, be sure to tell them Silverline sent you.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
Hi, I'm Barb Kilber, co-host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham. Join us each Wednesday night as we discuss comics, literature, movies, and anything else that may catch our attention.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to That's Silverline Show on Tuesday. I'm your host, Tim TK Ryder. We had some technical issues that led to the late start today, but thankfully Pops Fan Zant was on it and helped get us back up and running. So a big shout out to Madness Comic Network, Madness Entertainment Group. Make sure to follow all their socials if you aren't already. Anyway, the show as scheduled. I'm your host, Tim TK, joined as always by David Rios.
Hello.
And Ron Fortier.
How do you want it all?
And tonight we'll be talking about writing modern crime thrillers. This is going to be the art of telling the story in modern times with modern technology without letting the cell phone be a scapegoat or letting the conveniences of modern living prevent you from writing thrilling action, because it can be done. And we'll be getting into that in a second here. And yes, Pops, I understand technical difficulties, but we appreciate you hanging around and helping us out. That was very clutch, sir. Thank you. Okay. So getting into the modern crime thriller, because of course we do currently have a crowdfunder going on. Let me get that pulled up here so I can share it. Oh, that's the wrong link. We've been doing a couple of these. I believe we should still be on the front page. We are. We are number 2 on fundmycomic.com. And we can share that now. Currently at 138% of its goal is Cat and Mouse Vipers number 1. This is the first issue of the second volume of Cat and Mouse. penned and wrote by Roland Mann, of course, and penciled by our guest last week, Angelo Connexion. Yes. And inked by our very own Jose Fuentes, who is currently out. His family is dealing with some stuff, so he is in dad mode. And colored by Roberta Conroy, who is a veteran of the game for a long time. This is still going on for a few more days, and you can still get some unique art. Inks by Tommy Florimonti, and it looks like a few pieces have already been picked up, but we still have a few unique pages here that you can get the original pencils for. So if you want to buy some high-grade comic art as well as pre-order the newest book, you can do so within the next 11 days. We're going to go ahead and run our trailer here, and then we'll get launched into tonight's topic.
Cat and mouse vipers. Giant child-snatching vipers are terrorizing New Orleans, pulling children from their homes in the middle of the night in their eagerness to take on human trafficking in the city. Cat and mouse find themselves in the thick of it. Crime, action, drama with a smattering of superheroics. Now, like Roland Mann said, our head honcho here at Silverline, go do some backing, and we appreciate your support.
Very cool. So yes, that is Cat and Mouse Vipers #1, the first issue in a new volume. And of course, if you haven't missed out on the first volume and want to order copies of that, you can do so in the editions, as well as order perhaps some issues of Beyond the Stars and Wolf Hunter and many other such things. But like I said, tonight's topic is the modern crime thriller, because Cat and Mouse is just that. And we happen to have someone who has a bit of knowledge writing crime thrillers, even though they perhaps more modern for its time, but still a little bit behind. Ron Fortier, you happen to work on a little something known as Green Hornet that people may not have heard of.
Right, and that's why I really love tonight's topic and as such, because it was one of those weird experiences, and you have to wonder sometimes if modern writers understand going into a series dealing with heroics, mask Avengers, that kind of genre or whatever. I did a lot of research in setting up the proposal for the Green Hornet comic book, looking back on its radio debut in the 30s and early 40s, the movie Cliffhangers and all that good stuff, and the TV show with Van Williams and Bruce Lee. The kicker is, it was right there. It's there in front of you, and the uniqueness about the Hornet as opposed to other characters of his time and period, all of the Shadow or the Spider or other radio or pulp heroes, was that he didn't come on the scene as one of the good guys. His whole shtick, and if you will, was to pose as a criminal mastermind who was cutting in on the territory of the other criminals. And that's how they would, see him or whatever, and it would give him some kind of an edge. Okay. So I have that all figured out. I write this proposal. I sell it to Now Comics, and here I am. Get the assignment, time to start writing. And instantly, the minute you do that, you sit down and you go, well, okay, so now I am going to put him up against villains who commit crimes. Like crimes.
Yeah.
And trust me, the light bulb goes up over your head in the old cartoon fashion. Is like, well, wait a minute. This is really a crime comic. It's exactly what it is. And you do any kind of heroic police or Avenger or a hero type comic today, you are basically writing a crime comic. Your opponent, your protagonist has to fight somebody, has to challenge somebody, and the odds are good the villain is a criminal. Okay, so what crime are they committing? And that became a monthly challenge for a couple of years for yours truly. Of every time you come up with you finish a storyline, you got to come up with another one. And so I find that perhaps the easiest way to tackle something like this is basically be well informed. Read your local newspapers, watch the news, television, whatever, because whether we enjoy that fact or not, crime never takes a rest. There's always somebody doing something, robbing a bank, embezzling a bank, or cheating a heiress out of her money, or et cetera, et cetera. Crime is all around us. What you want to do is hopefully put your own spin on it, and you become kind of a devious character yourself as the writer, right? I mean, it's literally, okay, so what crime could I commit which would be kind of unique and different that, again, would challenge my hero, in my case, is the Green Hornet. I mean, the first story plot I actually came up with was, again, something I'd read someplace where criminals were actually creating what you want to call nameplates for electrical goods, high-end electrical goods, okay, that were made overseas and sold in this country. What they were doing is they were stealing knockoffs, really cheap knockoffs, and then taking them to a central warehouse where they would put on these labels from the high-end companies and then turning around and selling them as if they were high-end products.
Yeah.
That was their crime, all right? And the Hornet gets in on this, eventually, figures this out and solves it. But that's really the take. And if you're writing what's happening today, Tim already alluded to this as well. Be very aware of the technology around you. All right. I watch crime shows today, and you begin to understand crime fighting has a lot more tools than it had 10 years ago. Believe me. All right. I mean, with DNA and most big cities now have cameras on every street corner, et cetera, et cetera. If you're going to write a decent crime thriller, then you really, really need to put on your thinking cap and come up with some mastermind of a crime that not only can outwit your hero, but is going to outwit this technology that we live in now, this big brother looking over our shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and kind of your point there, you mentioned you had done a lot of research going into Green Hornet, and I feel like every time we talk about writing, a lot of what it comes down to is do your research, because it's just so applicable in so many different assets of how you craft good narrative. And with that modern crime fighting, every creative writing class, there's always the joke that the cell phone kills all the tension in a scene because someone sees something happen and they call the hero to tell them what just happened.
Yep.
And while that certainly is a reality you can play with, you can then find ways to increase that tension, make that tension a conflict in a different way, or find other ways to work with it. I think about characters like Daredevil, where there's very much been cases where someone has seen something and Daredevil's gotten a call saying, "Hey, I just witnessed something happen," or but Daredevil's main motive, right, is he isn't out there to kill anyone or put on the ground. He wants to put them behind bars. And so he needs now to find a way to find evidence that it's admissible in court. And so that cell phone call, that what if you have a hero that's out to kill someone, like if it's the Punisher and someone gives a call, right, he's mowing down the building with an M60, and then you'll find the bad guy's remains later. But you understand your character, understand the type of way to do it. And then if you want, on the flip side, really great tension with Punisher, think about characters like Microchip, a very tech-heavy supporting character who, of course, is hacking everything and has all the information. But Frank is paranoid and hates cell phones. Microchip knows that everyone's listening in on stuff, so he's not going to do a call. And so they're going to communicate via dead drops and encrypted communications, which require a lot of like work on both ends. So now the tension is, how do you handle those lines of communication? And then you as the writer have to research, what does an encrypted flash drive actually function like? How do you set up a dead drop like this? There's a lot of different ways that you can think about how you're now using that technology that's available for your crime fighters in a way that adds new layers of complexity or conflict for the scene.
Oh, I mean, totally. I mean, I think sometimes when you watch some of the current television mystery shows, I get a kick out of, writers must be frustrated. They have to be, okay? Because I'm seeing more and more where they literally send their characters out into rural areas, in the mountains, right, or in the woods, where all of a sudden the cell phone doesn't work because I'm not getting a signal.
Yeah,
and I'm like, okay, that's like, cheat. Come on, all right? It's like it's a conundrum, but again, it's something you have to work with, as you said, Tim, and I totally agree. You have to, if nothing else, make it something that your villain is aware of and will use to his or her benefit in whatever crime they're pulling off. I mean, literally, this whole idea of, like I was talking about, like take, for example, being a con artist or forging, people's signatures or whatever, all right? I mean, modern hackers today do that exactly, all right? It's just basically getting into somebody else's system and taking that information and maybe cleaning out their, bank account or whatever. So again, it's the concept of what's the crime, how devious is it, and then somewhere along the line you have to play the old Columbo back thing, where it's one thing to show the crime and what your master villain has come up with, but there's got to be a flaw. There's got to be something, because there's no such thing as a perfect crime. All right, so you have to have that flaw, something that your protagonist will eventually work out, trip over, or lead him back to capture the evidence Tim was talking about that they can use in a court of law. Because eventually your mastermind criminal is going to make one mistake, and that's what's going to do him in. It's going to be the Achilles heel that destroys the master plot or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can also, at the same point, you have like the idea that the Moriarty, right, the villain who has everything planned down except for the one part of what makes your hero good, is the one thing you can't account for, and that is usually the selling point of your story. But thinking about to give an extreme example of technology and how you could, in theory, break any essence of telling a good thriller, you have like the all-encompassing thought machines, right, where it detects crime before it happens and sends an alert to go stop it, things like that. But then you have movies. Let's a book first, but the movie's good. Minority Report, which tells an excellent story of inverting the crime thriller of, well, what happens when the machine is now wrong, and now the detective has to go out and stop the machine from doing something. Or Person of Interest, which instead of having the machine be wrong, had criminals that were just as technologically adept as the crime-fighting systems, that knew how to spoof camera footage or how to hack into systems, make it look away. And so even if you have a hero that is not necessarily interested in finding evidence at that moment, but in so as much as just putting a stop to the action as it happens, if now the classic trick of the thriller writer, like I said I did in Wolf Hunter issue number 1 and 2, was that I intentionally lied to the audience at points, and those points will end up being revealed in volume 3 where it gets put together. And I think a lot of good, the Sherlock Holmes story, is it I can't remember the name of the falls, but is it Reichenbach Falls, something like that?
Yep.
Where at the time his intention was to kill Sherlock Holmes, but he lied to the audience at the end of that story. and there's a moment where there's this little logical explanation for what happened, and it gets explained in a way that makes logical sense. But he says, like, well, the tension here demanded that the audience not know what was happening, so they had the perspective of someone who would have watched what was happening. And if you're sitting there watching something, you're not going to get the full picture. You don't have all the context. You're wrapped up in what's happening. And so, if you as a writer already know how to like your audience,
that's such a bizarre, literary piece of history. In that, as you already know, and everybody knows, Doyle was just totally tired of writing Sherlock Holmes stories, and so wanted to kill him off. And I guess maybe to his good fortune, all right, he didn't show Holmes's body washed up on the shore dead, all right, which would have canceled out what later happened, which was that opportunity for him to come back when he was offered an obscene amount of money from Strand Magazine, because they were sick to death of getting hundreds and thousands of letters from their fans who just screamed and howled that Holmes was gone and they wanted him back. I mean, it's just an amazing story, and how popular a character can be in the hearts of their readers. I mean, and so much so that I was at a pulp convention this past weekend in Chicago, and one of the subjects that we got to talking about, I met a fellow who'd just come back from England and toured the Sherlock Holmes Museum, which they have made as an exact duplicate of how 221B in his apartment and their rooms are set up exactly the way they are in the book. And he was telling me that in talking to the curators and the tour guides, there are people who to this day still believe that Sherlock Holmes is a real person. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's just how this can happen, all right? How something can just leap off the page and take hold of people. Talking about crimes, and that's what Doyle did. I mean, if you read a classic Arthur Conan Doyle story, Doyle pretty much came up with some really, really pretzel-knotted mysteries, all right, that Holmes had to unravel. And so he was thinking, leaps and heads of what kind of crimes could be committed for his day, for that period of time, all right, and came up with some doozies. He really did. Now, you can approach writing a crime thriller in that direct a fashion, or you can maybe write something whereby you don't understand the crime or are aware of the crime until your characters trip over something and get involved with it. I wrote a single issue of the Green Hornet, again, which was basically based on an article I'd read about illegal experimentations on animals in this country, and how a lot of unscrupulous drug companies or whatever set up these secret labs and basically, do these horrendous, cruel experimentations on monkeys or even cats and dogs. And that tickled my fancy to the point of saying, okay, dogs, animals that we see all around us every day, that people have as pets, loving pets, all right, really, really kind, gentle creatures and whatever. And man, I'm thinking, okay, now there's a villainous act, all right, there's a really cruel and black-hearted, character to put in the story. So I worked it backwards. Basically, what I did was I literally had this little kid convince his mother to take him to the Daily Sentinel to talk to one of the reporters or somebody about the fact that his dog is missing, all right? And he thinks the dog has been stolen. Police won't listen to him, but in the process of going to the office of the Sentinel, publisher Britt Reed happens to be walking down the hall, hears this conversation, stops, goes over to the desk, and asks the little boy what happened. The little boy tells him his dog always came home, was never, out late, but just went around, he had him, they lived in this little residential area, and he saw these people going by with a truck, and next thing you know, his dog was gone. So basically, Reed decides, oh, what the heck, we'll look into it. And one night, him and Cato decide to get in the Black Beauty and drive around the neighborhood. and literally end up tripping over a basically criminal activity whereby these guys have a fake, what do you want to call it, animal pound kind of truck, city truck, which is a fake. And they're literally driving around picking up dogs and stealing them from people's backyards or whatever, and then taking them to this secret lab to sell for big bucks, where they're literally being cut open and experimented on. And the Hornet and Kato follow them to the lab, realize what it is, break in, capture, the bad doctors and scientists and whatever, and turn them over. And by the end of the story, Reed is bringing the kid's dog back to him because they got there in time and saved him and a lot of other dogs. And it's, to this day, I still get a lot of people who love that story because it has a little more heart than the usual good guy fights the bad guy. It's basically our hero helping a kid get his dog home. But again, it's just, so there are different ways of writing a crime story.
We do have a kind of related question, so I think we'll answer it in order. Nick of Time says, please, I need help. I have $20 and need a Daredevil comic to my young small collection. What DD story is the best? And of course, we already mentioned Daredevil, but kind of a really good example of modern crime thriller with a cape type character. Personally, I'm a fan of Chip Zdarsky's Through Hell, as well as Daredevil Born Again. But there's, plenty of great Daredevil stories that all deal with, if you're a mass vigilante and you know who the villain is, how do you put together the story in a way that meets your moral conundrum?
I think, didn't Dementis do an art run on Daredevil? Then there was also the origin story that was penciled by John Romita Jr., the 5-part origin.
Yeah. And I believe
That
Damas
one was great. Both of those were great.
Yeah.
The Demanis era was very much very similar to like Batman-esque, a lot of blacks, a lot of dark in the artwork and stuff. So
yeah. DeMatteis worked on Man Without Fear, which is also a really good story for Daredevil. But as Ron was saying, you have the case of the hero who wanders onto something is now wrapped up in a story that they have no context for being involved with. And this is great because it almost kind of takes the Western trope of the sheriff or of the wandering gunman who gets picked up by the the wandering boy or girl who needs help, and they have no context, not involved. Or like, someone needs help, I'm going to do my job. But also, when you're talking about a modern story with a lot of technology, phones, cameras, what have you, if someone doesn't have any reason to have any phone numbers or any connection to anyone involved in this plot, then there's no reason that he's going to be getting information any quicker than the audience would be. And you also have a reason for smashing two very unlikely characters together. I wrote a story that is Ron, you're going to get a deep dive into some parts of my psyche here with this one. So I wrote a story about a guy who was kind of a bum. He was a skateboarder who was burnt out one night after drinking too late at the park, was crashing on the side of the road, gets picked up by men in black suits and a blacked out van, taken to a facility, gets doped up, and then with some, like stuff that we can't see, we don't know what's happening, and they gets dumped into a dumpster somewhere. And then we find out that when he wakes up, his body is starting to decompose, and he was given a faulty super soldier serum. He was one of the people that they were experimenting on to try and perfect the serum, but they hadn't quite got it down yet, and it's an unethical company, so they're doing human experimentation. And so now you have this zombified skateboarder trying to hunt down the people that did this, and stumbles across the daughter of one of the researchers who's been kidnapped to keep him quiet, and this whole thing. And so again, it's the story of you have again, it's a very modern story. You have cell phones, cars, Facebook exists, all sort of stuff. But here's a character who, in his character, they're like researching the type of person that he is, and doing my due diligence and writing out his backstory and knowing how this character operates. He's not going to have any of that stuff. And he's not going to be involved with anyone who's involved in this mystery or in this like a thing that's going on. He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, but given super strength and decomposing limbs.
Okay.
Okay.
But so essentially, it's like my take on Weapon X meets Toxic Avenger, right? But you can have a really good and thoughtful crime thriller if and not have any sort of reason to make it any easier on your main character. If you don't give it any reason to be easier on your main character, and that's kind of the thing, right? Is you understand your character and you write what they would do. You're not, as a writer, there are moments where you have to take your hands off the storyline, and you're just letting the characters express themselves and do their thing.
Yep. Right. Exactly.
And you know, and as a writer, I could give like so many reasons to make things easier to do things or whatever, but that's not honest for this character or for the setting or for the situation.
Right. I mean, well, again, that's really what you want to do. You want to make the puzzle that much more complicated. All right. And again, it's just test your hero to the max. All right. Because basically, if the crime that you're setting up, I mean, your average lone wolf hero, comic book hero, all right, isn't going to get involved with, you know, a couple of guys break into a bank and rob a bank. All right. I mean, that's the police are going to go after them. They have the organization, whatever. All right. But if a judge who recently had known mob boss sent the electric chair, wakes up in the middle of the night and hears noise in his den and goes downstairs, and there, standing in the middle of his den, is the dead man who was just electrocuted, and the judge has a heart attack and collapses. His wife comes in, sees the dead man standing over her husband. She faints and wakes up in the morning and tells the police it was the dead man that was executed that killed her husband. Okay, well, that's way beyond the police's normal kind of case. But it's the kind of case and it's the kind of crime that a masked avenger or a lone wolf would tackle.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's a plot that I use in a two-part story that I did where dead mobsters were supposedly coming back to life and getting revenge on the judiciary, the lawyers, the district attorneys, and the judges who had sent them to the electric chair or whatever. And again, it's you have to be dramatic. You have to give the readers more than what is basically urban crime, okay, typical crime that you see on the streets every day. I mean, unless again, okay, unless you are an urban avenger like Daredevil or Batman, and you're hanging around on top of rooftops and you're watching muggers in action, go to it. I say more power to you. But on the other hand, like characters like the Green Hornet and others, basically you need to have that set up. If they're going to be unique, different kind of characters that are going to go after organized crime, they're going to go after powerful white collar crime, if you will, then those are the kind of crimes you have to research and understand and put forth to have a decent story, especially in, like I said, today's modern world.
Yeah. And the kind of to that point is And usually, like the best stories, even if you are an urban Avenger, usually the low level stuff is the introduction. It's the first 3 pages to get to know this character, and then something big or exciting happens, and after that we move into something like that. Think about use Batman as a continuing example. You know, he'll start off a thing dealing with like part of the clown crew or whatever, like holding up a bank or something, but then it goes into everyone who was attending this gala or whatever now is like suffering from severe radiation poisoning and all this other stuff that, you know, turns into a Dr. Phosphorus plot. And Dr. Phosphorus is a wild character for this because he could be an A-list villain, but instead chooses to do real estate crime. But, you know, you get to this point where now it's now becomes this idea of like this mass poisoning plot, and Batman has to uncover, you know, what had happened in the situation and trace it back to the reason why, and then the reason will lead to the villain usually. I think of a really good example of kind of what you're mentioning there, Ron, is giving your character a reason to step in where law enforcement would fail in a modern setting. Something like Altered Carbon, where it's a little futuristic, but it's still, you know, if you can make it work in a future setting, you can make it work in a modern setting because technology, you have even more of a technological crunch the further you go. And why is this super soldier ex-assassin being brought out of jail to solve a crime? And the reason being is that law enforcement gave up because they can't put a piece together, because the guy who reported the crime is the murder victim. He's hiring this guy to investigate who murdered him, essentially. And, you know, you get to the whole point of these are still things that you can make work in a modern setting. Like a similar story to that would then be Neuromancer, where the character is already dead. He's just sent a bunch of spoof emails and spoof calls that he did before everything happened. And now the character is receiving all these things on a cell phone long after the murder has already happened. But as the writer, you're lying to your character and lying to your audience by extension. So you're continuing this mystery that, you know, you already know what's going to happen because you decided what the lie was a long time ago. But you have given yourself so much armor for reason why things don't fall apart neatly, or reason why there's so many layers to it, because there is so much depth you've given to the crime itself.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're talking like that. I mean, it echoed back to, I think, one of the greatest classic noir films ever made in the 1950s. Must have really shaken up audience when they watched it, because the opening sequence, I mean, is easily one of the most riveting as far as doing a mystery, you know, story. In that the actor Edmund O'Brien comes stumbling into a police precinct in the middle of the night, basically begging the police to help him find the man who killed him, because he's been poisoned and he has approximately like 24 hours to live. And the film goes off from there. Some detective comes along and we start backtracking O'Brien's life and the people he's met and this and that and whatever. But basically, and the movie, there's no happy ending to the film, i.e. they catch the killer, the person who wanted him dead in the first place, but there's no cure. And at the end, he is basically sitting there, you know, realizing that his time's running out. And that's the only satisfaction they get, is that they solved the mystery, but he still dies. Yeah. And that's noir. Believe me, that's about as noir as you get. Okay. Again, the whole idea of again writing modern crime thrillers, to me, is a challenge to a writer. It's really just what it is. All right, it's to be constantly aware of the changes in technology and communications. All right, the changes. I mean, Agatha Christie made a career of learning poisons. All right. Mm-hmm. And I mean, 80% of her murder victims died of poisons. Okay. And again, it's just, if you're going to write a crime thriller, you need to become the criminal. All right, it's not so much the hero to start with. You can't really start with the hero. You have to start with the crime. What's the crime going to be? How's it committed? What makes it so unique? What makes it a challenge for your hero? And again, like I said, though, that's not a hard thing to do when you look around and you pay attention to news stories, articles, and whatever. Again, I mean, you know, I talked about bank robberies being sometimes a run-of-the-mill kind of thing that wouldn't appeal to your savvy Sherlock Holmes type detective or individual lone wolf. But I actually wrote a comic story where I flipped that around on its head to a degree, where the bandits who were robbing the banks in this metropolitan city were doing so in a souped up hot rod of, you know, whatever, that once they ran out of the bank and jumped into this hot rod car, they would take off like a bat out of hell with police cars and squad cars coming after them. Now, well aware that these police vehicles have radios in them where they could radio ahead or they could get a helicopter here or there, right? The kicker is the hot rodders would lead the cops on a chase within 2 or 3 blocks of the bank, turn a corner down a residential street, and the police vehicle would turn the same corner 2 minutes later, and our mysterious hot rod would be gone, vanished, boom, nowhere's in sight. And they keep pulling this kind of stunt in a general square area of the city, where they'll rob a bank or a credit union or whatever and head off in the hot rod, and the police try to set up cordons where they know they're going to end up, and they disappear in the residential area again. And the solution ends up being, what my devious mind worked out, was that one of the criminals happened to be a carpenter. And one day, while walking down this block, realized that it would not be impossible if you had enough funds to create an actual fake wall like they do in Hollywood movie sets.
Yeah.
But a fake wall that literally hinged between 2 buildings covering an alley. So basically, they make it look like an extension of the buildings. The crooks take off in the hot rod. One of them's waiting in this phony building that exists, sees the hot rod coming, opens up the garage door. They pull in seconds in front of the cops, close, and the cops go by because it's just another building.
I was going to ask, is there a Night 2000 rig running around the neighborhood they just drive into the back of?
The actual solution ends up being the whole point of the story ends up being that the one of the detectives ultimately, in driving up and down the street investigating, because it's the general same area, all these things happen, all right, basically ends up going by on a day when that particular street on one end of it, because it has fake fronts on both ends. That's how they make this work in different parts of the city. And the kicker is, it's like trash pickup day. And he just subliminally realizes this one building has absolutely no trash cans in front of it. Okay, why not? And literally goes over to inspect it and realizes what it's a bad front. It's bogus and whatever. So now they just basically stake out the place, wait for the guys to come back, and the minute they come out of it with their hot rods, surround them and capture them, and away we go again. Yeah. But again, it's just trying to be devious. It's trying to be sneaky. All right, what the writer becomes that magician, okay, of what kind of a trick can I pull on my readers that they're not going to pick up. And in writing this as a comic strip, we literally I made sure my artist had sequences where you went by the fake front and didn't see there's a trash can, but there's none here, okay? And playing fair with the, comic reader and see if they can pick up on it or not.
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of the idea of knowing when to lie to your audience. And I want to acknowledge like the pantsers in the room, that if you're not a planner like some of us are, where we pre-write our comics, if you're a pantser and you write things going, and you need to either extend for time or it's too easy for a hero, the thing is you don't need to know the solve for your lie or for your mystery when you come up with it. You could get to that moment where you feel like you're stuck, and then it's like, okay, what's the biggest left hook I can throw at my hero right now that'll apply the screws? Like, at what point does Commissioner Gordon pull a gun on Batman? And the reader's like, what just happened? And now we have so much more time to explain that mystery of, well, actually, it was Scarecrow's mind control gas, and you can come up with that after the fact.
Yep.
But the idea of, you play fair to your audience, but like I said with Wolf Hunter, is like I intentionally lied at some point, and part of that was like, okay, what's the big left hook that I'm going to throw here? I'm going to have some character that you already know do something that's out of character, which then as the audience you should be smart and pick up on, that I'm thinking of something. But it's that moment of, well, now you had seen all the setup before this, and now suddenly we have a moment of big aha. And if you notice that beforehand, you feel so smart about yourself. And if you didn't, it's your mind is blown.
Oh, being able to fool your audience. I mean, again, it's the magic trick. All right. I remember the first time my wife and I went to see Usual Suspects, and sitting there, and we'd heard other people had seen it and told us, how twisty it was, and so you're sitting there watching this thing unravel on the screen, and what's his name? I forget the actor that starred in it, but he's basically telling you this story about this Hungarian mobster, Kaiser Soze, and all this good stuff, right? And all this good stuff, and he keeps spinning this web, all right, about this crime and this murder and the police and this and that. And at the end of the movie, he, leaves the police station and walks off with this supposed limp. But as he's walking, all of a sudden the limp disappears. And he turns the corner away from the police station, and there's parts of his gang waiting for him and whatever. And I'll never forget, we were in a small theater when we saw this. It was a mall theater or whatever, and there couldn't have been more than 10 people in the theater. And so it's all done. He reveals himself in that last sequence as he gets away, and you see the cops are totally baffled. The credits are going to start to roll. The lights come on in the theater, and this guy in the middle of the theater behind us yells out, "What the hell just happened?"
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At which point I turned around and told him 99% of what you just saw was a lie.
Yeah.
And it was brilliantly scripted. It was brilliant, all right? Because it was all based on spinning a lie.
Yeah.
Everything that guy said. And you imagine the scenes, they showed you scenes he was telling you about and all this good stuff, right? And it was all a lie. He sets up this heist, but basically it's a revenge plot to kill off half the guys he brought in on the heist, because he's just again, madman, getting his revenge on these guys who, one way or another, had done him wrong in the past. So brilliant film, and again, all about misdirection, which is what crime writing is all about. It's about misdirection. Create an elaborate crime, all right, and basically have your readers going down one path that's a red herring, okay, and learn how to twist it on its heels and surprise them at the end with, no, none of that was true. Here's the real thing. Boom. Yeah. And obviously, your hero's supposed to figure that out.
Yeah. One of my favorite movies, it's also I have a question from Nick of Time we'll get to in a second here. the hero doesn't figure out the thing. I think that's what makes it so impactful. However, movies and books, I'm a huge fan of anything that Philip K. Dick put out. But A Scanner Darkly, I think the movie has done a really good adaptation of it, but the book itself is a wild ride. But essentially, you have this idea where the premise itself starts off almost false, because and it makes it very clear to you that you're watching or reading a story with a false premise, because you have this character who explains that he's an undercover cop. In order to become undercover, he had to get addicted to the drugs from the crime ring that he's trying to bust. And these are like mind-altering hallucinogens. And so we end up seeing all these weird interactions with him and the supposedly hardened criminals who just seem like a couple of guys. And they're kind of watching as the world is melting around them, and there's all this like weird stuff, and they're trying to hide from threats that don't really exist or deal with problems that have simple fixes. And you're almost wondering like why there's so many weird mismatched conflicts until you realize that his interactions with the police force are very hostile, and that this is actually the higher ups putting together a plan to get rid of him because he questioned them, as well as two of his buddies that were also undercover at some point. And so, and at the end, you end up, the third act is the reveal of these guys are starting to go into overdose or withdrawal and are having severe medical issues. And Winona Ryder's character is trying to get him to a hospital to like save his life, and is having to explain to him is like, you've essentially been in a coma for the last 6 months. This has all been the police department trying to get rid of you.
Wow. All right.
Yeah. Nick of Time asks, I don't know if it's too minor of a topic, but how would you feel with a vigilante story where vigilante A has a different definition of criminal than vigilante B? And I think that's hitting on what makes for a lot of good conflict when you introduce team characters or partners. I mean, in comic world, this is anytime that Daredevil and Punisher have worked together, or anytime that if you want to go into movies as well, since you mentioned that you know more about movies than comics, Lethal Weapon, they're not vigilantes, they're officers, but they have very different ideas of how you carry out the law.
Right, exactly.
And so it's, if you're having two vigilantes, that whether or not they're partners or if they just exist in the same city, Moon Knight and Spider-Man is also a great one where Spider-Man is dealing with more of the, street level thugs and people stealing purses, and Moon Knight is looking specifically for the people who are murderers and hardened criminals. And both think each other, and Moon Knight thinks that Spider-Man is wasting his time. Spider-Man thinks that Moon Knight isn't doing enough. And now you have a level of conflict that will allow you to create a really compelling B or C story where the characters now have to hash this out before they can deal with the bigger A plot.
Right. I mean, exactly. The whole concept is not, painting your heroes, in just one color as such. All right. I mean, one of the things that you try to set up in writing any kind of a story is the motivation for all your characters, including, the heroes and the villains. And if you end up with a team, a duo of crime fighters, then the odds are pretty much, swayed to the fact that each of them is going to have a different reason or a different origin as to why they do what they do. And that's going to play out in how they interact, and especially against, fighting against a criminal element. I mean, basically the concept of being, you play that across the spectrum. You can have a vigilante, okay, who's basically devoted to justice, and that's what he wants to see played out. Whereas his opposite number could be somebody who was personally affected by crime and doesn't want justice, wants vengeance. Mm-hmm. Those are two different strong passions. And as Tim said, that becomes an entirely different subplot and conflict that could easily undermine their partnership and give the edge to the bad guys if they don't figure a way to make what they do work properly and depend on each other. I mean, given any kind of a situation, all right, if you're going to partner with somebody, then you better have somebody you can trust and somebody who's has your back and vice versa. If you're going at this with different moral imperatives, then that's pretty much on thin ice.
Yeah. All right. I feel like Ron, I've talked quite a bit at length here, but David, I want to give you a second to chime in if you have any thoughts or anything you want to mention. Either as a colorist who has worked on crime comics or someone who enjoys crime stories.
Well, pretty much. This is definitely a lot more your area. One of the things that I do that was talked about that I started to think on was at the end here the buddy. So you've got your Spider-Man, or say your Punisher, Daredevil, whatever, and completely different means and what's acceptable to them. But I think the other thing that was kind of interesting that I like that they kind of play with on the Daredevil side is not only is Daredevil playing against Punisher for his extreme methods, but they also, if a writer can bring this in too, is they can also look at Daredevil's his need for resolving this versus his faith. So maybe he realizes, this picture kind of fight scene goes out and Punisher gets taken kind of off the table, right? And Daredevil runs after the guy, but that the guy is a really bad guy, like really, really bad guy. And, at what point is it where, Matt needs to know, he needs to stop him, so he has to use extreme methods, still within his, not Punisher's level. But then it's like, does he lose it? Does he come back and start struggling with what he has to do, how violent he has to be, versus his faith in trying to do the right thing? So on a lot of these crime stories, it's where do you put the villain and the villainous things that they will do in direct comparison with who the hero of the story and what they will do. Will at the end, once everything's resolved, will the hero come out tainted because he just got so far into it that he absorbed part of that darkness? And is he still the same person that he was when he started? So there's a lot of things that you can do and play around with that. And one of the things I'm thinking of kind of similar to that is it's a movie. It was based off a book, but Mindhunter. You think of Mindhunter, that really messed him up. And that type of thing, in solving the crime, is it, are you going through and just doing a period piece? Is it a noir type, 1920s or something where you're playing more the detective type thing, or are you going in and really digging deep and doing more of a psychological crime drama? And where do people come out? So
I'd say, speaking of that, it's a really interesting point of when you're thinking of your characters, think of like what's one button that haven't been pushed or one place that haven't been driven. Because a lot of what makes a crime thriller, like with westerns or anything else, is what makes it important is the depth of the characters in their own moral code, right? Kind of what you were saying with Daredevil. I think it should be mandatory reading from like the newer Batman series is Their Dark Designs and Joker War, which was a moment where James Tynion hell froze over and James Tynion got the green light for Batman to kill the Joker. But of course, it's been 80 years and that's never happened. So there has to be a really good reason for this to happen. And of course, like we were talking about earlier, is they don't show the body, and now that's a trope. So, you can't actually kill the Joker because that would, kill the comic series. But Batman still made the conscious choice that in this moment he's going to kill the Joker, and because he believes that will result in the most lives saved. And this is coming after the events of Their Dark Designs, where he watched Alfred die, and all of his Bat family get put in life-threatening situations. All of Gotham gets taken hostage, and essentially he realized that if this doesn't stop, he's going to watch everyone in his life die. And so he makes that choice in the Joker War to put an end to it and do what he thinks is necessary to save everyone's life. So understanding that character, what is their moral compass, and where does that moral compass break, can lead to a really great character moment in a crime thriller.
Oh, I think if good writers understand human psychology, they soak it in, they pay attention to the world around them, and somehow infuse their characters with these traits. And, the subject matter we've been talking about, especially, the last 10 minutes about the conflict between the characters and the good guys and their personalities interacting, brought to mind one of the most powerful comic scenes that I ever read. And it was written by the late Denny O'Neil, who was really one of the greatest Batman editors that ever lived. And at one point, O'Neil was writing Steve Ditko's character, The Question. And The Question was a really, really grim Avenger vigilante type guy. And in this storyline, he's going after this sadistic gang that's murdering people. And he is forced to team up with a police sergeant, who ends up being like the most bigoted cop The Question has ever met. And they have to work together. But early on, within the first issue or two, the thing lasted 2 or 3 comics or whatever issues. The Question is repulsed by this guy because, again, he's this low-life, bigoted, idiot cop, right? And he cannot stomach him to save his soul, to the point where 2 or 3 issues to get to the end where they find the gang, they get attacked by them, they get ambushed by them, and as lead's flying right and left, the cop takes out a couple guys, turns around and sees a crook about to shoot the Question in the back, and literally pushes the Question out of the way and takes the bullet himself and saves the Question's life by sacrificing his own. The Question kills the final gang member and is left there kneeling down looking at this guy he hated with a passion who just died for him. It's just, O'Neil doesn't use words. He doesn't need words at all. He just, the Question is totally buffaloed and left stunned with this unbelievable act of, again, self-sacrifice by a man who he thought was despicable and a lowlife and whatever. And so it's like, create moments like that in writing. Learn to understand people, and again, like I said, their psychology, and the fact that don't be so fast to judge people.
Mhm.
All right, because trust me, when you do that, all right, you're leaving yourself open. You will be surprised.
Yeah. Prejudice can make for really good fodder if you use it as a foil for your character.
Ooh,
Yeah.
always,
Yeah.
always.
It's
Yep.
always a good character trait to overcome. Yeah. Well, this has been How to Write Modern Crime Thrillers, and we have talked at length about all the different traits you can pull on to make your thrillers compelling and not fall victim to feeling like technology is making it too easy. Next week, I believe we have. I'll have to double check here. I believe we have Tom Mason on Sunday, so that'll be exciting. And then on the 15th, we'll be talking about how to create the perfect chase scene.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, and chase scenes are something beloved in comics and movies, but it's something you can do very effectively in a comic, even with still panels. So we'll be talking about all that, both narrative elements as well as artistic elements. Make sure to check out Wednesday Wham and Silver Sunday. Their respective times, I believe 9 and 8 Eastern respectively. And we will be back at 8 p.m. Pacific time next week with that talking about chase scenes. I'm going to go ahead and get this primed here. Perfect. But until that time,
Make
mine Silverline.
Silverline.
Hi, I'm Greg Horn. Make mine Silverline.